All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the December Essential Vegan Desserts live event, the last live event of 2024, which is just astonishing to me. This year has flown by. The older I get, the faster time goes. So I'm so happy to see you here today with me. I have been able to see many of the questions that have come in, and they're great. So I have a bunch of things to say, as usual, about the topic, but I want to make sure to get to the questions. So for those of you who aren't aware, on the right side of the dashboard or your screen, you're going to see a Q&A box, and you can add a question there and just hit send. I've got a link. I think I added a link in there, so it's super easy. I just want to remind people, if you have a question of a technical nature, write to support@rouxbe.com, and someone from the fabulous Rouxbe team will get right back to you. And any of my students who have a question, in fact, anybody who's here who would like to talk to me by email about anything, just write to me at fran@rouxbe.com, and that will be great. I want to really appreciate my Essential Vegan Dessert students. The work that's been coming in for grading has been fabulous. I've got quite a number of new students, and you're all doing really well. So I want to welcome Rouxbe students, Essential Vegan Dessert students, graduates, and guests today. Now, before we get started here, it's such a interesting time of the year insofar as people, I've noticed, tend to be a little bit in a frenzy over the holiday season. And I would like us all to take a collective breath and just relax. For some people, there's a lot to do. Other people don't do too much. But this year is so interesting and kind of wonderful in terms of unity, or that's what I'm hoping. We have Christmas, Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa all at the same time. And I don't know if I've ever seen that in my lifetime. So I'm taking that as something very, very special. So everyone will have something, or most of us will have something to celebrate. Before I start, I want to note that right before I signed on, I got a note from Rouxbe, an email from Rouxbe, you may have as well, that a holiday sale just started, 40% off on all courses and memberships. So there's a note right on the dashboard here. If you're interested, I would love, of course, to see many of you sign up for Essential Vegan Desserts and work with me personally. So let me get started now so that I can tell you what I have prepared for you, and then let's get to your questions. So the topic today is, what can I swap X ingredient for this ingredient? And those of you who know me, have listened to me or followed me, know that my short answer is, and it still holds, every change makes a difference. And that really says it all. Very nearly every ingredient, a swap is going to make a difference in your result. Even sometimes switching brands can make a difference. But that said, you learn a couple of basic rules. And, Essential Vegan Desserts, someone asked me over Thanksgiving, so what do you teach in Essential Vegan Desserts? Is it like how to use avocado in place of butter? And I said, no, we talk about substitutions. We talk about ingredients. We have whole units on ingredients, but we start with the basics, as Rouxbe is all about foundational technique, the basics of baking. So you can do some testing on your own, test smaller batches or cut a recipe in half. And if you are making some changes for dietary considerations, allow your palate to adjust to change. I mean, always, as a kid anyway, I really liked sweets, and I can't remember how sweet they were, but based on the household that I grew up on, I'm guessing they were very, very sweet. I actually like less sweet desserts today. My palate is attuned to that, less salt, less sweet. But that said, a dessert should taste like a dessert. As some of you have heard me say, my first boss when I worked in a restaurant, I took almost all the sugar out of their brownie recipe. And he said, Costigan, you're making brownies, not brown bread. So that's something we want to talk about. I'm going to start with starches because they're right in front of me. So a starch does a couple of things, but basically it helps to bind and thicken. I use Let's Do Organic, which is a brand of Edwards & Son. This is their new cornstarch is in this eco bag. This is the original. So this is cornstarch. This is arrowroot starch. I've got tapioca starch here. It's a real show and tell today. And I have some potato starch that I haven't opened. They all work the same. Almost always you make a slurry before you use these starches, which have to be cooked. So a slurry means you're dissolving them in a liquid before you add them to whatever you're cooking. The differences are they're almost one for one, but not 100%. When I use cornstarch, I always look for a non-GMO cornstarch. This one is organic, and consider allergies. So if someone has an allergy to corn, I wouldn't be using this. I happen to like arrowroot. Where's my arrowroot? But for example, in making a chocolate pudding or a pudding, using arrowroot wouldn't work. Arrowroot gets a little bit stringy or slimy. Stringy, let's call it stringy. So I had actually a student tell me that she used potato starch, which isn't something I would have thought about, but she said, yeah, it worked great. So those are your starches. 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, 3 tablespoons of flour. You want to cook that to remove the raw taste. Cornstarch needs to come to, the mixture needs to come to a boil and cook for about 1 minute. Arrowroot, I use it 1-to-1, but a lot of people will say 1 to 1.5 tablespoons. It thickens immediately at the boil, almost just under the boil. So it will then thin out. So you want to cook that less. And tapioca is actually a starch that is used to make vegan cheeses kind of stretchy. So it does make puddings. You use a little bit more and a little bit less of the potato starch. Now, one of the biggies is vegan butter and oil, which are both fats. So I'm going to show you some of the butters that I pulled out of my freezer. The OG, as far as I'm concerned, is this Flora butter, which isn't made anymore, so far as I can tell. And it was a great butter to use. But Violife and Country Crock are it's the same company. It's the same company. So you can swap them out. Thing is that they all have slightly different ingredients. Most of them are made with, this is made with palm and palm kernel oil, sunflower oil, pea protein. Country Crock, one of them has faba bean, and I don't remember which one it is, but I have a friend, actually a Rouxbe graduate, who is allergic to fava beans and another friend who is as well. So that would be a butter she would not use. And this is really the one that seems to be the most easily found and maybe the oldest earth balance. And I apologize to anybody here who's from Earth Balance, but I don't actually care for it. I kind of taste something when I use it. However, when you're using vegan butter, they are oil, they're oil based. There's no dairy. So I reduce the amount. If I'm adapting a recipe, I use about 3/4 to 7/8 the amount of vegan butter that I would for dairy butter to allow for the milk solids. Don't use spreads when you're doing vegan desserts. You need these, I think in the UK they call them block butters. So I'm going to call them block butters. Interestingly, these butters, these came out of the freezer, but let's say they were living in my refrigerator. Oftentimes a recipe will say, use the butter softener at room temperature. These butters do not need to be softened to room temperature. They actually are around out of the refrigerator on your counter for 5 minutes, about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So I like to make something called ermine frosting. That's ERMINE. I follow a recipe actually on the King Arthur website, and it's an old-fashioned frosting. Or it's also, I think, called boiled frosting. You cook together sugar and flour and some plant milk. You're making really a roux, and let that cool, and then add in the butter. And temperature matters when you're making that. So I use my infrared to take the temperature of things. And that's how I noticed that my butter was already at 70 degrees. And I did a little bit of research, and sure enough, that's it. So when you're choosing a vegan butter, you want to consider flavor. I prefer to use unsalted butter. I prefer to use a quality butter and a high-fat butter. You would choose a nice high-fat butter, dairy butter, if you were doing that, and always a block. Miyoko's butter is made with cashews, so that leaves a lot of people out with nut allergies. It also melts to a puddle. There is a newer premium butter called Tarlami, and she uses cocoa butter in addition to coconut oil. And you're not going to find it in the grocery store, but Food 52 is carrying it now, and it's an interesting butter. If you look at traditional recipes, meaning non-vegan, although I think of vegan now as getting very traditional, very moist cakes, or you'll read that using a vegetable oil makes your cake very moist, and it does. So the thing is, you don't want to cream your vegan butter with the sugar as you would with a traditional cake. Use the wet and dry method, which we teach in the course, which is how I developed all my recipes. The dry ingredients in one bowl, the liquid ingredients in another bowl, and then you mix them up. Now, in terms of oils and fat, coconut oil is a vegetable oil that does contain saturated fat. It needs to be melted before it's used, and then it is used often to set raw desserts. So a lot of raw desserts are made and set in the freezer, really, or the refrigerator. I use almost no coconut oil. I just don't find it necessary. My favorite oils are a mild tasting extra virgin olive oil. I like sunflower oil. I think it tastes almost buttery. And I will say that the oils that I use are expeller pressed and organic and stored carefully. This is a new oil. an algae oil. Some of you may have seen it. They're advertising it pretty heavily online. And 11 Madison Park, which is a 3 Michelin star and absolutely worth it. I got to have dinner there. Restaurant in Manhattan, fully plant-based, uses this oil. I don't know. I haven't used it yet, but it says neutral, light, a little buttery, and it's actually somehow fermented from algae. So those are the oils. Now, cocoa powder. I have these cocoa powders up here. There are basically 2 types and then subtypes. Alkalized is Dutch processed cocoa powder. It's the darker cocoa powder and it dissolves the most easily in liquid. And then sometimes some of you may have seen black cocoa powder. That is just highly alkalized. Dutch cocoa powder, just use a little bit, just a little bit, because it doesn't have a good taste. It's for color. And non-alkalized, which is natural or American style. People talk about cacao. Cacao is a natural cocoa powder. It is not raw. It's never raw, but it is unroasted. It is unroasted. Now, those 2 main types of cocoa powders and their offshoots, they're interchangeable in things like hot cocoa and pudding. It's about the taste you like, but not in cakes. You can't just sub one for the other without playing with the leavening. So you need to remember that. And we talk about that we talk about the why in Essential Vegan Desserts. A biggie, of course, is eggs. Eggs do play a number of roles in baking, right? So you have to think about what function of the egg are you replacing? So an egg contains liquid, it binds, it's got some fat, and there's some leavening. The white of the egg is really the key to achieving fluffy cakes. Not all cakes need to be exactly fluffy. So think aquafaba, for example. There is no hard and fast rule. And when I see this a lot, here is a list of egg replacements. It's applesauce, it's blended silken tofu, it's blah, blah. They don't all work. To my way of thinking, if I want a cake, I want the cake to have a really nice crumb, and you're not going to get it that way. So what I would say as a starting point is when you're replacing 1 egg or 2 eggs and then stop, increase the flour, so that's binding, by 2.5 to 3 tablespoons. Add some extra liquid, about 2 tablespoons. It can be a plant milk. Some people are using Greek style vegan yogurt. Why Greek style? There's less water. And aquafaba, which if there's anybody here who doesn't know yet about the miracle of aquafaba, it's the liquid, the water that chickpeas have been cooked in. I reduce it and chill it before I use it. 3 tablespoons equals 1 egg. And we have to leaven our cakes, right? So we want to increase the baking powder and baking soda in a recipe that you're looking at by about 1/4 teaspoon each, and then add for a layer cake about 1/2 teaspoon of vinegar. Now, all of this said, I think it's important to know that this is not 1980, which is what I think I started, like 30 years ago, I started converting recipes. I was trained traditionally. We didn't have aquafaba. We didn't have commercial egg replacer. And I was able to make really nice cakes using baking powder, baking soda, and vinegar, which during the war, when eggs weren't available, people were doing that. So you don't, I didn't give you a formula here. I gave you some ideas. There are commercial egg replacers today. I don't use them very often, but the one I do like the most is Bob's Red Mill. And then we talk about in the course, and I know they talk about this at Forks Over Knives as well, applesauce, mashed banana, chia gel, flax gel. Those, the flax and chia gel bind. That's what they do. Too much flax, some of you may have taken out an egg and used a flax gel. Flax and chia gel is 1 tablespoon of the ground seed and 3 tablespoons of a liquid. And then you just leave it alone and mix it until it gets really viscous. Too much flax, you're going to get a fishy taste. And I think all those applesauce and fruit purees bind and add some moisture as well. Some people say that they are a fat replacement, a little bit, but they don't do a lot for a cake without any other zhuzhing it up. I like these for cookies more than that. In terms of flours, I use whole wheat pastry flour and AP flour, mostly 50-50. You can use all AP, you can use 100% whole wheat pastry flour, but you don't want to use whole wheat flour, which is good for bread, So I'm going to stop here and go right to the questions because I see so many and they're really terrific questions. All right, Joe M. I'm especially interested in finding egg substitutes to use in baking. I've tried flax eggs, flaxseed, and the end product was heavy, took forever to bake, and didn't taste very good. Well, Joe, if you're still here, because I know sometimes people come in and out of these lives, I just was talking about flax gel. It binds. It doesn't leaven. So if that's all you used, I'm not surprised that your product was heavy. Without seeing your recipe, or you're telling me more about your recipe, I can't talk to why it took forever to bake and didn't taste good. But again, I would say, remember that there are really good vegan recipes in the world today. I don't mean go out into the web and just choose something. You don't know who developed this recipe. Choose a recipe from a reliable source. Rouxbe recipes work. My recipes work. Chef Chard-Nolan's recipes work. There are a lot of good recipes out there. Hi, Alice. Alice said, I need powdered sugar for cookie recipe or frosting. Is monk fruit whole food plant-based? Well, where is my, I pulled this out for live events because I don't use any of these sugars. Monk fruit is low han, that's a little berry, and it is processed very, very heavily to take the flavor out. And most monk fruit sweeteners that are on the market are used in combination with another one of these, what are called NSS, non-sugar sugars. I put a link in this Q&A to a live event I did previously where I went into detail on these kind of non-sugar sugars. So monk fruit is definitely not whole food plant-based because it's not a whole food at all. And so I would rather powder a sugar like, I use cane. Yeah, thank you. There's the link. Thank you, Patrick. I use cane sugar, which I powder in my Vitamix, vegan cane sugar, or you can do that with coconut sugar. That will work. You want to powder these things in your Vitamix. But I have here monk fruit, and I think it's mixed. As I said, they're mixed. This is a pretty popular brand, and it says monk fruit sweetener And then in much smaller writing, it says it's erythritol. So some of you, I'm guessing, are familiar with Dr. Michael Greger, nutritionfacts.org. And he promoted erythritol for a period of time as a healthful sweetener. And then he retracted it because it turns out that it isn't healthful at all. And there have been some serious health issues with people who are ingesting it. I have here allulose. This was a very popular for a while. It was going to be like the end all and be all. Has an aftertaste. None of them bake the same, and I don't think they're good for you. So that's what I have to say about that. But go, if you have a chance, go and watch or listen to that live event about these NSSs. Tony wants to know what's the best flour to use when making baked goods. I usually use unbleached all-purpose. Unbleached all-purpose is a very good flour to use. I use it as well. I have only a couple of recipes where I use 100% AP flour. I generally mix it 50-50 with whole wheat pastry flour, but that's a good flour to use. SD says, I used whole wheat flour exclusively for all my baking, including cakes and cookies, for 30 years, and they were delish. I'm gluten-free now, so no more. Well, that's really great, SD. I have found whole wheat flour, if you're talking about strong flour, to make my baking a little heartier than what I was looking for. So again, this is a situation where we all have different palates. We all get used to different ways of eating. So if you're gluten-free, I'm sure no more. Tina is asking about a well-stocked pantry and what about expiration dates on these types of items? Well, we do a pantry reset in all of our Rouxbe courses. And, you know, pantry, it's stocking your pantry and keeping it straight. That really is a work in progress. You know, I go through my fridge and freezer and I go through my pantry on a pretty regular basis. I use a label. I look at the expiration date. I write when I'm looking for my baking powder, usually on a can of baking powder. I will write, yeah, this says 3/18/24 when I got it. And if you store, you have to think about how you're storing things too in terms of the expiration dates. So many pantry staples and essential vegan desserts pantry would not look very different at all from any baker's pantry. So you want to keep your cocoa powder and your chocolates really well sealed, away from heat, away from strong odors. I like these Cambro containers, but sometimes a jar will do. So that's what I think you should do. Harvey's asking about allulose. Harvey, I was just talking about that. I don't use it. This is a brand of sweeteners, a very good company, but I don't like it. And I think this says mild, clean, no bitterness, no aftertaste. I beg to differ. I think there's an aftertaste, and you have to do very different things when you're baking with these sweeteners. So I don't. I'm sorry. I'm thinking, I don't want to be the Grinch. I'm just telling you what I think. Michael V is asking about vegan butter. What vegan butter would I recommend for baking a pie crust with? Any of these block butters would be great. So, if you're not going to be using vegan butter or you're not going to be using it often, you don't want to go out and buy a whole bunch of them to try. So I would recommend either Violife or Country Crock, both of which are easy. They're pretty readily available. This one is in sticks. And I've got, a large Violife and a small one here. So those are the ones that I personally like. Suzanne is asking, her daughter is gluten-free. What flour can I substitute for in a cookie recipe that will not make them dry? Well, it isn't just the flour that might make the cookies dry. It's the recipe. A good recipe should give you a nice, moist, and delicious result. There are many different gluten-free flour mixes on the market. This is the one that I find works the best for me. I think it's the most reliable. It's Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 baking flour, blue bag, because there is a different Bob's that's made with more bean. And this is complete, meaning this has some xanthan gum in it, so you don't have to do anything but whisk it up and use it. I purchased, this is, who is this? This is either King Arthur or, yeah, this, I think King Arthur. And this is also complete. And it's very interesting. You know, when I talk about testing things, I did an event at the American Vegan Center in Philadelphia during this year. And I made my gluten-free brownie bites. And I did a dozen using the Bob's Red Mill flour and a dozen using the King Arthur. Both of them are 1-to-1s and a combination. You know, gluten-free flour baking mixture is a mixture of gluten-free ingredients. And I absolutely preferred the flavor of the ones with the Bob Red Mill. And out of, I would say, a group of about 20, about 15 people, I didn't tell them which was which, preferred the Bob's. 5 people liked the other ones. So there you have it, you know. One thing I will tell you, Suzanne, and anybody else who has, you know, is interested or needs to be gluten-free, when you're mixing your batter, your dry and your liquid together, and you've made batter, let it rest for a little while, because it definitely makes a difference. With wheat flour, once the leavening is in, you want to get those batter-based desserts right into the oven so that the leavening doesn't start dissipating. But I know for a fact, well, the fact is my taste is that letting the batter, gluten-free batter, sit for a little while really is very helpful. Elizabeth has been diagnosed recently with a fructose intolerance due to long COVID. Oh, I'm so sorry. And fructose intolerance, she says that a balanced diet is challenging. Well, I bet it is. So let's talk about what is fructose. Is a sugar that's found naturally in all fruits, some vegetables, and honey and sweeteners. Table sugar, white sugar, is called sucrose, but it also has fructose in it. I'm guessing that most of you don't use high fructose sweetener. That's in a lot of processed foods, and we're trying to stay away from processed foods, but it can really give you awful digestive upset, that's for sure. So you want to limit high fructose foods, and some of them include apples, pears, watermelon, asparagus, and peas. Some people can tolerate those foods if you eat them in small amounts with meals. The following ones: grapes, blueberries, strawberries, carrots, green beans, and lettuce. You don't want to use agave syrup, fructose, honey, or inverted sugar. Maple flavored syrup, I would never use that. I'd use real maple. Molasses. The list that I found said palm or coconut sugar and sorghum, which was curious to me because sorghum is a cereal grass and it's generally accepted for people who have upsets with other kind of sugar. So Elizabeth, what you really want to do, and I'm sure that you know this, you have to be a detective. And you have to really, really, really look at ingredient labels for one thing, because there is a lot of hidden stuff, but you can find it if you really look. And the other thing is try a little bit on the okay list and not by itself, with some other food, and see how you feel. So good luck. Good luck with that. Carolyn has a food sensitivity to garlic. I just heard about an Italian woman that I know in Italy, actually, has a sensitivity to garlic as well. So I think what what I substitute when I'm cooking for people who can't have garlic is finely minced shallot or leeks, and I find that that really works well. Anne is asking, can you generally substitute whole wheat or white whole wheat flour for AP? So that's a great question. So whole wheat, as I said earlier, I don't ever use whole wheat flour in cakes or cookies. I use whole wheat pastry flour, which is whole wheat flour. It's just a different wheat and it has less protein. So that works well. White whole wheat is a very interesting thing because, when I first heard about it, I thought, oh, white whole wheat. So that must be pastry flour. And it's actually, excuse me, it's not. I spoke with the people at Bob's and at King Arthur. It's a variety of wheat that is like, it's whole wheat flour. It has just been rebranded to, I think they're calling it, I don't remember, but I will find out. And if anybody wants to know, send me an email or I'll put it in here if I can. But it's been given a new name because there has been so much confusion about what is white whole wheat flour. So look for it. It's got a new name. And what I generally do, and is most of my batter-based desserts, meaning cakes, are made with 50% AP flour, 50% whole wheat pastry flour. I'm going to ask Patrick to put up quickly 2 photos of, one is a cake that I made for a birthday yesterday for a really beloved chef in Philadelphia. I'm just going to step off here for a minute. And the other is a mise en place. And that cake, which is my chocolate cake to live for, was made with 50% whole wheat pastry flour, 50% AP flour. And it was for a big party. And not everyone was vegan, as they usually were. And we just heard that's the best chocolate cake I ever had. So that's something that you can do. Mark, based on Mark's question, I'm guessing this is really a forks over knives type question. Mark's asking, any ideas on a recipe for banana bread without using butter, oil, and added sugar? Also, can fresh made nut butters be included? So Mark, when you're making a banana bread or any kind of banana dessert, you want to use a very ripe banana, because when it's really ripe, it's going to be much sweeter, and you want to at least limit the additional sweetener. Past a point, though, I find that bananas can be really ripe and then go too ripe, and then they don't taste good to me. So be aware of that. Bananas have a lot of moisture, so you probably can limit the oil. You probably going to need some added sweetener, maybe date paste or maple syrup, if that's allowable for you. And I don't know about nut butters. I mean, I don't have a recipe for banana bread where I'm using nut butters, but you can thin out a nut butter. I actually love using I like nut butters, and I also like tahini, unless sesames are an allergen for you. That's something that can replace some fat and it does some binding. So you can try that. I believe there are recipes like, for banana bread and banana muffins in forks over knives. Beth, oh my goodness. Beth has been recently diagnosed with alpha gal syndrome. So all mammal related products are allergens. There are so many products with hidden ingredients, how to avoid and substitute. So Beth, I believe alpha gal syndrome is caused by the Lone Star tick, and it has been said to make people allergic to meat. And I'm not laughing because I'm sorry for you. I'm laughing because I was bitten by a tick in New York City. Imagine, I was shocked. And when, I had it, it was removed, and then it was diagnosed, and it was that Lone Star tick. And we were laughing like that was a waste on me because I don't eat any animal products anyway. What you have to do is really, it's very hard. When I see something that says natural flavors, well, there's no way to know what that really is. So I would really look at their labels and really be a detective about it. And if something has a lot of natural flavors, just don't use it. You can use plant milks without a problem. You can probably use plant butters without a problem at all, nut butters and so on. We have lots of things for you. And then just see how it is that you're feeling. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'd be curious to know if it was from a tick. Hi, Kathy. Kathy this is a very interesting question. Kathy is saying, if the purpose of kneading bread is to help activate the gluten, which it is, that's one of the reasons, what is the purpose of kneading gluten-free bread? Well, Kathy, I have really never seen a recipe calling for kneading gluten-free bread. It doesn't make any, but clearly you have. It doesn't make any sense to me because there is no gluten per se. I think if you're seeing a recipe that's calling for gluten-free bread, what they're really saying is work the dough until it's nice and smooth, because many gluten-free doughs they don't adhere very well. They're more difficult to mix. So that's what I think the answer is. You're not really kneading it, you're mixing it really, really well. If you knead a gluten-free bread dough long enough, even though there is no gluten in gluten-free bread or gluten-free flours, you will activate something. So that's what I would say. I think it's really more about mixing the dough really, really well until it's nice and smooth. Kathy R doesn't want to use coconut oil. Well, neither do I, Kathy. So I'm probably have one or two. I think we have one recipe in the course where there is some coconut oil. Any oil is a substitute. Again, my favorite oils to use are expeller pressed organic sunflower oil. I like that the best. I like extra virgin olive oil. And I decide if I'm making something where I want a neutral taste, I don't really want to taste the olive oil, I use a mild flavored one. If I'm making an Italian almond cake, for example, and I want a more aggressive olive oil, I'll use that. So I use California Olive Ranch, but I have a label here that says organic sunflower oil with the date. So I keep my oils I reuse and keep them in dark containers. So that's your substitute. Coconut oil is often used to set a raw dessert because it's going to get hard. If you melt your coconut oil and then you take some sunflower oil, for example, and olive oil and put them all in the refrigerator, it's going to be very interesting for any of you to do. So your sunflower oil is going to get viscous, but not solid. The coconut oil is going to get solid, and the olive oil is going to get solid as well. So I just love it. You know, there's a lot. You use all of your senses. Elisa says, I'd like to know if any oil is good for baking. Wow, we have a lot of coconut. Some recipes call for coconut oil and others for sunflower. Other than taste, do they behave differently one from another? They don't really behave differently. Coconut oil, if you're not using what's called deodorized coconut oil, if you're using virgin coconut oil, it's going to taste like coconut, whereas sunflower oil has a very neutral flavor. I think a little buttery, personally, a little bit. But when you're using coconut oil, if you're mixing it into your liquid ingredients, because you're doing a 2-bowl dry and liquid, if your liquid ingredients are chilled at all, the coconut oil, as soon as it hits, it's going to start getting firm again, and you don't want that. So that's basically the difference. I prefer not using the coconut oil. Hi, Tiffany. So Tiffany is saying if she has a non-whole food plant-based recipe comfort food from childhood, yes. What's the best way to convert it to whole food plant-based so it tastes pretty similar? Banana cream pie. Well, you know, again, that's kind of tricky because my understanding of whole food plant-based, and I do understand it. I've been doing this for I consider myself a whole foods person, but I do use oil, limited amounts of oil. I made, as some of you know, I made Rip Esselstyn's wedding cakes, and they were the cake. It was basically this cake without any added oil. So that also goes to say that sometimes everybody needs a dessert, even the Esselstyns. And Dr. Esselstyn was 91 this week, so we all wish him a happy birthday. Anyway, it's not going to be, if you're doing a whole food plant-based, no oil version of your banana cream pie, you're going to have to do a lot of subbing, and I would cut a recipe in half or in a quarter and do some playing around. Banana cream pie, you could do tofu and a nice, very ripe banana, or maybe cashew cream, a really thick cashew cream, and some banana, and then do a crust that isn't a rolled out crust, because I haven't ever made one without oil that I would recommend to anybody. So do a pressed cookie crust, that could work, or a date crust, and just see how it tastes. It's not going to taste exactly the same, that's for sure, but you can definitely work on it. Good luck. We all like our comfort food recipes from childhood. I mean, mine was chocolate pudding. Maria is asking, what role does potato starch play as an ingredient in baking? It isn't used very often in baking, as far as I can tell, but if I want to take AP flour and make it more like a cake flour, I remove some of the cake flour, depending on if I'm doing a single or a double layer, 2 layers. I would take out maybe for a single layer. If I'm using a cup of flour, let's put it that way, I would take out 2-3 tablespoons of flour max and add in a starch. I tend not to use potato starch. I use arrowroot or cornstarch, but you could do that with potato starch as well. It lowers the gluten and it makes a more tender result. And it also, there's binding involved. So that's my answer about potato starch. I was so glad to find this. Melissa is asking, I feel you, Melissa. Melissa's asking how to achieve a good mint flavor in baked items. I've had some that taste fake or like toothpaste. Couldn't agree more. Me too. So I have settled on this peppermint flavor from Simply Organic. And the trick is to get a good one and use the littlest bit. Sometimes I use fresh mint when I have fresh mint and infuse the plant milk with a really strong mint flavor. And I really like doing that. But if you're using mint or you're using even almond extract, you want to use just a little bit or the flavor gets very fake. Melissa is asking, Melissa's got a couple questions. A good vegan dipping chocolate that's delicious, although a little pricey, not extremely pricey. Well, Melissa, I have all of these. This is all chocolate. You have to decide, first of all, what tastes good to you, because we all have different palates and they don't all, this divine chocolate, for example, 70%. Generally, I use a 70 to 72%. Here is a different brand, Choco Love. These are all vegan chocolates. 70% that says strong dark chocolate. Now, 170 can taste more bitter or darker than another 70. I don't personally find this one super dark. This is Theo 85%. That's really getting up there. It just depends who you are. And this is a green and black 70%. So really the answer is, oh yeah, this is a one from Trader Joe that's quite dark. The answer really is for you to buy a couple of bars and do some taste testing yourself and see what tastes good to you. We have an assignment in Essential Vegan Desserts where it's a dipping assignment, but we're dipping, and a student can pick any 3 items to dip. We're dipping them in ganache instead of chocolate. Then that's a whole different thing because the ganache is made with milk too. But, chocolate is not, quality chocolate is definitely not inexpensive at all. But generally speaking, you're paying for quality. You're not paying for fillers. You want to absolutely, if you're buying a non-milk chocolate, you have every reason to think that you're buying a vegan chocolate, but some companies are adding milk powder to their chocolates now. So shop around. I've seen really nice vegan chocolates that can be melted and used for dipping in specialty shops and in supermarkets. So that would be my answer to you. Do a little tasting homework. Melissa is also asking how long can freshly made date paste be stored in the fridge? I keep mine for about 3 days and then I put it in the freezer where I can just scoop out what I need and it lasts for months as long as it's tightly sealed. Leah has an interesting question. What can replace tomatoes? As I have someone who cannot have it in any form. So I saw this question early and it took me right back to my days at Angelica Kitchen, which is really the OG vegan restaurant. It was on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And we made something that was so delicious. And it was called a no-mato sauce because we didn't use any nightshades in that restaurant, meaning tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, peppers. There's one more, and I don't remember what it is. Tobacco, I think it is. And so we did this no-mato sauce, and I think you can do a search and probably find it. I've got some older cookbooks that will have it, but actually it's beets take the place of tomatoes, but honestly, it tastes like tomatoes. So, you know, you're not going to replace tomatoes in a tomato sandwich with that, but you'll be able to do a sauce. Hi, Anna Marie. Anna Marie says, my husband gave me the forks over knife pastry course for Christmas. Congratulations. I think he had a bit of motivation since he's had some goodies from your cookbook. I'm looking forward to upping my pastry game. That's great, Anne Marie. Thank you for that, and have fun. Michael is saying, I've heard that replacing some water with vodka can make a flakier pie crust. Nothing seems to work better than low water content butter, though. I don't use vodka. My trick for flaky pie crust is to respect the pie dough, and that means using ice cold ingredients, ice cold water, just enough liquid, and letting the pie dough rest 3 times. And I use apple cider vinegar, and that keeps and I actually make most of my pie doughs using oil, which is ice cold oil, and it makes a flaky pie dough. We make flaky pie dough. So I think if you want to try vinegar in place of vodka, then give that a try. Esty is asking, can a spread like Earth Balance be subbed for coconut oil or vegan butter in baking? No spreads, no spreads. So you need, I mean, this is, if you want to stick with Earth Balance, get the sticks. Get the sticks. They're pretty interchangeable, but vegan butters, again, I cut back a little bit on the amount of vegan butter that I use when it melts down. So yes, you can. Teresita's asking what's the best substitute for bananas. She doesn't like them. I would say don't use bananas. There's, I mean, bananas have a very definite flavor, and just make something with apples or peaches or mangoes, or, there are so many different pears, so many different fruits you can use. You don't need to eat anything you don't like. Diana's asking which kind of flour to use for gluten-free bread baking. There probably are, excuse me, gluten-free bread flours on the market, but I love this flour, the Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1. Julie wants to know some suggestions for subbing mushrooms. Oh my gosh, I love mushrooms so much, but I know not everybody does. I would get, when mushrooms cook down, they get nice and chewy. So I would do almost any vegetable, roasted, chopped into small pieces, and then you can, you want some nice umami in there, use lots of good seasoning. Jody is saying, what's a good base for tomato-free, gluten-free chili? Well, chili should be gluten-free. Chili is bean-based, so therefore it's gluten-free, and I would look for, I don't always use tomatoes when I make chili. You can do a nice vegetable-based chili without tomatoes, or look up that no-mato sauce. No-mato sauce. The birthday cake that I made yesterday, that is my chocolate cake to live for. The recipe is in my cookbook. It's in the course or variation, and you will find it on my website. What I did differently yesterday was I kind of combined two recipes. I made a double layer of the chocolate cake, which is, that's this. You know, it's 2 layers in 2 pans. And I glazed each layer after they were chilled with some ganache to kind of waterproof them. And then I filled and frosted the cake with the chocolate pudding that is also in my cookbook, which is a basic chocolate pudding. It's cornstarch and I use Dutch processed cocoa powder. I use organic cane sugar, vegan cane sugar, but you can do it with coconut sugar as well. And I use oat milk, Oatly. And there you have it. SD is asking how much ginger powder for fresh ginger. It really is going to depend on your ginger, but I'm glad you asked that because spices really make a difference. I want to show you these cookies. These are, speaking of ginger, these are molasses cookies that are made with a lot of spice. And my friend Joy Manning, she is the editor of Edible Philly and a well-respected recipe developer, brought these cookies over. They're irresistible and they're very highly spiced. And as we do, those of us who are developing recipes, and I would suggest you all do the same thing. You get a notebook and you make notes. And she said the recipe was tested with burlap and barrel spices. If you go looking through the live events library, you're going to see that Ori Zohar, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of Burlap and Barrel, did a live event. And not all spices are the same. So this is a really delicious, really strong powder. And not all fresh ginger. I happen to love ginger and I love fresh ginger too. But I get some sometimes that is not very potent. So I can't say this much powder, this much fresh. It depends on your ginger. Fresh ginger, it depends on your powder. Sometimes I do both. But again, you want to add cautiously because you can always add more. Not so easy to fix. I mean, sometimes I've made something gingery that was too strong. So just consider what you do about that. And I have one more question, and then we're just right at the hour, a little more. Which of your cookie recipes do you use for making Linzer cookies for the holiday? I like Linzer cookies. I use vanilla, what I call a vanilla cookie. That's in my previous cookbook, More Great Good Dairy-Free Desserts, and it can be rolled out and cut. And then Linzer cookies are so pretty, right? You have the bottom, and then you can do a decorative holiday cut out for the first. So any nice vanilla type cookie will work for making Linzer cookies. So, oh my goodness, these were such good answers. So one more thing I want to tell you, and then I'm going to have to say goodbye to y'all, and that's about swapping out plant milks one for the other. You want to consider your own dietary considerations if you have some, or who you're serving. So, for example, I love soy. I like tofu, I like tempeh, I like edamame, and I like soy milk. And I think unsweetened soy milk without a lot of junk in it is so good for baking. It has a nice amount of healthy fat. But I know there are a lot of soy avoiders out there, and so I don't use it. I stay away from nut milks because there are people allergic to nuts. And also, rice milk doesn't have enough protein or fat to make something that's rich. So I settled on oat milk because I haven't so far run into anyone who has a problem with oats. I prefer the Oatly brand. It is certified gluten-free. And there are different kinds. So there is a low fat. Well, that's like skim milk. I don't use that for baking or making pudding. I use either the regular or the full fat. I spoke with the customer service at a representative at Oatly because they're, the barista blends, and it's not just Oatly, which are made to foam really nicely and thicken for your coffees. I assumed that the barista blends had the most fat, and actually they don't. They just have more things in them to make them do the thing in your frother. So the full fat has the most. And if you have a recipe that's asking for cream, a vegan cream, and you don't have one to use, you can just add some more fat to your plant milk, and then you're going to have something that's like a cream. So I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you so much for sending these wonderful questions. I look forward to seeing you in January in 2025, and I'm wishing everyone a happy, healthy, peaceful, delicious, and wonderful holiday season. I hope to see you soon. Thank you.